Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Why the Church Is. And last week, remember, we began with why the church is a building. And it's a building that God is building, that God is putting together. And it's not a building that's made with human hands where God must dwell or where God can only do business in. And that's where we're going with our second in this series is why is the church or why the church is a business. In Luke chapter 2 and verse 49, Jesus was 12 years old and he was found in the temple by his worried parents, and he said to them, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be about my Father's business?" Other versions translate that a little bit differently. They say, did you not know that I must be in my Father's house? I must be about my Father's business, or I must be in my Father's house. Growing up, my grandparents, or one set of my grandparents, ran a farm. And when we'd go and visit them, it was always a highlight to go and see our grandparents and be at the farm. And they had a little sun porch room where there was a little couch, and that would be my bed for the time I spent there. But it was such a wonderful feeling always because my grandmother had these nice flannel sheets, and for whatever reason, it was always so comfortable to be there because I was in my grandmother's home. I was with my grandmother. As the years went on, they sold the farm and they moved. And we would visit them at their new place. And then they moved again and we'd visit them at their new place. And then after my grandfather died, my grandmother went to a final place and then another final place. And the interesting thing was, it wasn't that it was the same place, but it was always the same person. And whenever I was with my grandmother, it was always a feeling of being welcomed into her home. Today, there's a lot of questions about how the church should go about its business. And unfortunately today, many people look at the church as a business, that somehow they equate the business of the church with a church being a business. And so I heard recently a well-known minister say that the business of sin is far much important than the business of COVID. And so churches need to open their buildings so they can be about the business of sin. And I appreciate the sentiment because I think every minister would agree that sin is a much more worrying problem than COVID. The difficulty I have is that the equation of a church having to be open on Sunday in order to be about the business of the Father. The Apostle Paul, for instance, would go into town where there was no church, and he would be about the business of the Father. He would be about the business of sin. I think sometimes we have forgotten that the church is not simply a place to attract. The church is not simply a place to put on a show so people will come, but the church is to be about the Father's business. One of the great worries, I think, of modern church is how do we keep people attracted to the message of Jesus? And that's why church has become a show, and that's why church has to offer so many programs and things in order to keep people interested. But the church is a business in the sense that it must be going about the business of God. The Apostle Paul could write about the business of God from a prison cell, never even visiting a church, and still perform very many great things in the business of God. In Matthew chapter 5, verses 14 through 16, Jesus said, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." And Jesus spells out for us there how the church is a business, or at least what the business is that the church should be about. Being around my grandmother, it didn't really matter whether it was on the farm or one of her 4 subsequent homes. It was being around my grandmother. And being involved in the church business takes place on Monday just as much as it takes place on Sunday. And I get it. We want to be together. And because who hasn't been there when all of a sudden something has happened in a gathering, and it's exciting that it happens. But at the same time, the church's business goes on. It's not one or the other. That we can still be the light of the world in the midst of a dark and sinful place, letting people see our good works so that they may glorify our Father who's in heaven. How is the church a business? The church is a business by providing hope to a world that has lost hope or in need of hope. Paul said in Philippians chapter 2, verse 14 and 15, and I think this is good advice when we're talking about doing things on social media or any other area of life. He said, do all things without grumbling or questioning or complaining, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God, without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. Let's be about the church's business. There's a social media hashtag or meme that's going out there that church is essential, and I 100% agree with that. Church is essential whether we meet in a building or not. Church is essential whether our buildings are closed or not. Church is essential whether we're being persecuted or not. Because we shine as lights in the world. That is the business that the Father wants us to be about. God bless everybody.